It is 1 minute past, but good afternoon, everybody. It's so great to see so many people represented here today, so many individuals and organisations. And I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes introducing the context for today before I hand over to our facilitators for this afternoon's roundtable, Dr. Jenny Altschuler and Dr. Kate Daniels. For those who don't know me, I'm Daniel Hall. I'm the director here at the Joint Refugee Action Network, and we are a network of organisations working with refugees and asylum seekers across the UK. Our aim is to create a space a bit like this for innovative and challenging discussions. And our hope is to ensure that these forums are always solution focused rather than problem focused. And the findings of today will be sent to government, to local authorities, and to other key players in the sector. So the topic of today's event is mental health in the refugee sector, capacity building, and community response. All of our roundtable topics are a direct response to current events. They're a response to the findings of previous roundtables. So our most recent roundtables focused on trauma response and on the Ukraine crisis. And the topics are also a response to members of our network as well, because you guys are the experts in your field. So if you haven't already signed up to receive the JRAN email updates, then please do visit our website and do that. They're quite interactive, so we rely really on hearing from you. So we exist to support and hear the voices of the sector, so we're keen to hear from you when it comes to any future events. We're really keen today to ensure that nothing's missed, and we have a really experienced and diverse list of speakers and attendees today. So please do ensure that your voice and your thoughts are heard during the breakout sessions. Because of time constraints, you'll know it's only a couple of hours. It's a lot to cover. We won't be able to hear directly from everyone or from all of the points covered during the discussions that you have in the breakout rooms, but we are going to be collating all of those into a report later on, and that will be publicly available. You'll be able to download that. So I'm going to hand over now straight to our facilitators, Dr. Jenny Altschuler and Kate Daniels. I've had the privilege of working with both of them. And it's a field that they both have a lot of experience and expertise in. Jenny is clinical director and co-founder of the One-to-One Children's Fund. She's a consultant psychologist and family psychotherapist who spent much of her professional life working in the public sector, most recently at the Tavistock Clinic. Kate is a family therapist, systemic psychotherapist, and senior lecturer at Salaman's Institute of Applied Psychology. And she's been doing a huge amount of work in supporting host families across the UK following the invasion of Ukraine last year. So Jenny and Kate, I'll hand straight over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Well, welcome everyone, and lovely to see you. And as Dan said, this is really an opportunity for us to think about the challenges and and sharing best practices, what we've found useful and what we think will be useful in the future. In a context in which the views toward outsiders, people who deemed foreign, not us, are becoming increasingly polarized. It feels particularly important that we're able to be thinking about the mental health issues faced by displaced people, by including refugees and asylum seekers. And I'm also particularly pleased to be representing JRAN, which, as many of you would know, is this umbrella organization of different organizations working with refugees and asylum seekers. But I'm also speaking on behalf of the One-to-One Children's Fund, who were part of setting this up, drawing on our experience of working with displaced people in Kosovo, in the Middle East, in the camps of northern Greece, and in this country, which has included a program of future leaders that we're going to hear more about from Yasir, of a leadership program for young refugees here in the UK. Where JRAN is particularly pleased to be partnering HIAS and JCOR, and this is the start of a new partnership. But as importantly, it's a partnership with the Association of Family Therapy, of whom I'm a member, but Kate is the person who's really spearheading our work in relation to refugees. And I think it's particularly important because, as we'll all know, that even if people move on their own, the experience has a huge impact on families. There's always a sense of how you make your connections, how you think of family back home or family who's moved, the sense of ambiguous loss, that you've lost a person, but in many cases they haven't died. It's that they're just not there. And how do you maintain that kind of contact? So Kate, I'm really pleased to be co-hosting with you, and I wonder if you can just share some thoughts. Can't hear you, Kate.
Right, I was muted, sorry. Thank you, Jenny. I was just going to say, I'll give a little context to why I'm here, which is because a year ago, it seemed apparent that there was going to be this enormous influx of people from Ukraine. And I was very concerned. There was also this huge, generous-hearted response from people here. And it seemed to me really important that in some way we try and capitalize on that response. And so that's how our project got set up. And we are systemic psychotherapists, family therapists. So our work is with communities of people, specifically families, but often groups, other groups, people who are important to each other, and our attention is to context. So we're very, very interested and concerned to attend to what happens when different contexts meet and need to negotiate their differences. That's part of our stock in trade. So it seemed really valuable and important for us to get involved. I ought to say that it was always the case that we wanted to start at that rather specific level and develop our support to refugee agencies all around the country, and that's where we are now. And I also want to say, when we're talking about mental health, because that's the subject of this forum, one of a key tenet of ours is about learning from the people with whom we work. And I've been thinking about that a lot. And in terms of what Jenny was just saying, we've been thinking about how to explore the tensions between how we bring some expertise, but actually we learn about the expertise of our clients, and we learn about the contexts that inform their approach to well-being, mental health, that we don't make assumptions of knowing. So one of the very important things that we address is the not knowing and the learning from. And I think that's a context that I would always want to privilege. We're interested in multiple voices. So we're interested in voices of family that are present, but also, as Jenny was suggesting, those that have been lost, those that are held in memory, those that are part of generations ago, because those are the voices that inform the way people respond to suffering, to resilience, those kinds of issues. So I suppose those are the things that are going to be in my mind, and I'm really looking forward to our speakers, because I think that our speakers are going to bring so much experience that I don't have to this, and I'm really looking forward to learning from you as well. Jenny, can't hear you.
With that in mind, it's particularly pertinent that the next person who's going to share his thoughts is Yasir Arafat, who is an alumni of the Future Leaders program that I was mentioning before, a mentoring program that JRAN has, that the One-to-One Children has been instrumental in setting up. And Yasir, you've been living in the UK for 3 years, living in Bath now and studying pharmacy at the University of Bath. But you're originally from Myanmar and part of the Rohingya ethnic group, which according to the UN is the most persecuted ethnic minority in the world. And so really handing over to you and wanting to hear your thoughts about mental health and the challenges.
Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here with you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, just to give you a little more information about myself and my background. I grew up in Myanmar. I belong to an ethnic minority called the Rohingya. So we Rohingya people suffer poverty discrimination, persecution, genocide in our country, in Myanmar. When I was in Myanmar, I wouldn't know what freedom was because I had nothing to compare my life, just my village, because I spent my whole life inside my village. I would think that was life. I didn't know there was a different world where I am now today. I think sometimes I think myself, am I happy here? Am I satisfied with my life here? I ask these questions myself sometimes. I was raised by a single mother, my mom. She worked so hard for me to become, in Rohingya language, we call Balamanush, which means a educated person who serves humanity. She would always tell me, you need to become a Balamanush. I remember this word always. In 2017, when the Myanmar military started brutal crackdown on the Rohingya, killing people, slaughtering children, burning villages, about 1 million people fled into neighboring Bangladesh, including myself. I fled genocide in Myanmar and became a refugee. I have survived civil war, persecution, and bare subsistence in a refugee camp in Bangladesh all my life. I arrived in the UK seeking asylum during the 2020 lockdown. The Home Office put me in an accommodation center for 9 months. I would share a tiny room with 3 other people who I wouldn't know at all. I wouldn't understand them at all. And my English was not good enough to understand people at that time. It was the time when the extreme civil war was ongoing in my hometown. I would always worry about my family and I would think that if they were alive or safe. I had many sleepless days and weeks. I miss my family. I have faced so many difficulties, some financial, of course, because I was not allowed to work at all when I was an asylum seeker. I would feel hopeless and regret sometimes at my being an existence. I would think that I shouldn't leave the country, even though it was life-threatening. I would at least be able to die with my family. That's what I would think. A few months later, I found about Future Leaders Program. So I am actually a Future Leader graduate from One-to-One Children's Fund now. So this program was amazing, actually. It's a kind of mentoring program, and also it has helped me sense my existence. Throughout the program, I developed my confidence and skills, a real sense of my existence. That time, I developed my communication skills, my English language skill. During the program, we would meet online. I met a lot of friends, and the program has hugely helped my social anxiety and confidence with others. Because of these kinds of program, I think, now because of this program, I can say, I do not feel hopeless anymore. I feel so connected and motivated. And I met a lot of good friends in my life. I worked so hard and also got a lot of support from my teachers, my friends who I met at through Young Leaders, Future Leaders Program at One-to-One Children's Fund. Now they become my British family. I completed my GCSE and even got a level 9 in English. I completed my access to higher education diploma last year. And now I'm studying in one of the UK's top pharmacy school at the University of Bath to become a pharmacist independent prescriber. So this all suddenly happens just within 3 years, not only because I worked so hard, but because I have had a lot of support, and I have a lot of support at every stage of my life while settling in my new home in the UK. I can see some faces here who are with us, and they can listen to me. Thank you very much, Danny, especially for changing my life, for helping me who I am today. So I left everything back. I left my family, I left my friends, I left my memories. I miss them every time. I'm always scared and worried about my family, because anything can happen to them, because I witnessed how brutal the Myanmar military and armed forces are against the Rohingya. I left everything, but I noticed I have carried a legacy, which is a kind of thing, a fear, brain processing disorders, I can list, the things that disturb my daily life now. To give you an example, a loud noise. Something a little strange even for me, I wanted to share is recently, I still remember, like I think a few days ago, I was on the upper deck of a bus, sitting by the window. And I was actually coming from my placement, my accommodation later in the evening. When the bus window hit a branch of a tree, I was protecting myself, like pulling my head away and getting out of the seat. I feel like I even I disturbed the person next to me. My heartbeat raised. It took me quite a few good seconds to notice that I was completely in a different environment, that I was safe. I was not in Myanmar. I can cope these kinds of situations now, most of the time, because of my hope for the future, because of the amount of support I get from my British family and friends, because of some good people like you are, I have met in my life now. So I would end my talk here asking, what can you do to help people suffering? I would word it a bit differently. What can you do to help mentally harmed people who are victims of crimes? Thank you very much.
Gosh, Yasir, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And hearing you, I was just also thinking about what contributes to our sense of resilience in difficult times, and that sense of having somebody who believes in you, somebody who trusts you, but also some opportunities to do something, some sense of agency. And I, like you, just want to mention Janie Duff-Klein, who's here with us today, who has, this has been her brainchild, her baby, this project. And Danny, you've touched many lives and made a phenomenal difference. So thank you very, very much we're all hugely appreciative of what the Future Leaders program has been able to do. So thanks again, Yasir, for being with us this afternoon. And I hope you'll feel by the end of the afternoon you've heard some other things that are very useful to think about. Hard to just flip onto something else, but I will take us forward. And I want to welcome Paul Silla-Lacourt and Gabriella Brent to be speaking next on building capacity to understand and meet the mental health needs of refugees and asylum seekers. Paul is the senior psychological therapist at the Refugee Council, and Gabriella Brent is head of programs at UMNA. And together they're going to be speaking for about 15 minutes, so sort of 7-8 minutes each. Over to you. Paul, I wonder if you want to kick us off first.
Yeah, certainly, Jenny. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I feel very, very humbled by Yasir's account of his life in this country and question about how to, what can we do to empower people who are going through a similar journey. So hopefully in the short time I've got, I'll talk about the work that we do very much in the setting of initial accommodation, where so many people come needing some of our support. So just a quick about me. So I've been working as the London Therapeutic Service Manager at the Refugee Council now for 5 years. I've been at the Refugee Council for 10, and what we offer is up to 12 sessions of psychological therapy, so it's short-term work. And just picking up on something that Kate said about learning from the people we work with, really everything I'm going to say has been born from the people we serve. And at the heart of it is cultural humility. We really seek to understand from the ground up. So yes, Stuart, when you were talking about your experience in this country, it reminds me of a client that I met in initial accommodation, and he moved out to dispersal accommodation. And in a very short time, I realized that there was something really preoccupying him. And it was because he lived in the equator all his life. He'd never experienced time changing, the daytime changing, and had never experienced the cold as we were approaching winter. So that was a real example of sort of learning from the client's experiences to what they needed. So in terms of our model of therapeutic work, it's really based on understanding and appreciating the multiple traumatic events that people go through on the asylum journey. So it really has to start in that context. So the homeland persecution, clearly the reason why people have to leave their homeland in the first place. But also we realize that on the journey, people become very, very vulnerable, often much more vulnerable, even than the homeland, not being able to speak the language, often without resources, so becoming victims of trafficking and modern day slavery. And then sadly, as we know in the UK currently, with the not only the culture shock, but also the laws coming into force, even as we speak today. So really what our work seeks to do is to understand and work with the multiple needs of our client group. And for this reason, we went into initial accommodations in London and Birmingham in 2015. And when COVID happened, we were very well placed to continue that virtually in all the hotels that sprung up. And now we've increased our capacity in these hotels. And really, I'd say one of the key contributory factors of the efficacy of the work that we do is working with partners. So the partners that we have are predominantly the NHS teams who refer clients to us, their patients who they identify as needing psychological support. Also migrant help in terms of the asylum support that's needed. And also because we were actually in these accommodations, we've got a good working relationship with the accommodation provider as well. So it's really a question of working collaboratively. And recently, we've in one of our projects in London, we the local community mental health team started to offer support as well, which was fantastic. So we could refer people that we were concerned about to them as well. So and also if we you know, didn't have capacity to see people, they could refer from their service people who they needed psychological support. So what we've been finding is that we're not duplicating work, which is another really key aspect of what we do. So really, you know, when we're working with our client group, we appreciate that the loss of home is huge, and you see what you were saying about, you know, that the family and being fearful of what's happening back home. I think that can't be overstated. You know, people are not just worrying about their own lives. They're even when they get refugee status, the fear continues. Often the family is persecuted in their absence. So we really appreciate that is a very challenging environment to be. So what we've done is we've developed three core principles based on the experience of our clients. And the first one is a therapeutic relationship, which we know is common to all therapy. However, with our particular client group who've been persecuted, establishing trust is absolutely the key, the open door to the possibilities that follow. And at the heart of that is having an attitude of hospitality and also a non-judgmental attitude, which is, you know, time and time again, our clients tell us that it's the non-judgmental attitude that we bring that facilitates their ability to trust and to communicate with us, which then brings us to the second core principle of bearing witness. So bearing witness is really where we're literally doing that. We're taking, without judging, what people's account is of their persecution, and also listening to their strength and resilience, which is really key, which we then prize with them. And then the final core principle is psychoeducation, because we realize that in this country there might be aspects that are, you know, not known, which can be of great value. And one of the most important, I think, is, again, Jessica's point about sleep and initial accommodation, is neuroscience of the brain and, you know, mindfulness activities to self-regulate. You know, we've had clients who weren't able to sleep at all in initial accommodation for over a year, who after some neuroscience and some stabilization exercises were able then to sleep for 7, 10, one was actually managed to sleep 14 hours in a straight go. So this is really the heart of our work. And just because I realized the time, so I think one of the most important things that we found is the importance of normalizing. It's really about saying, yes, because you are in danger, because even if you're refugee status, your family is still in danger. So normalizing people's psychological distress as a normal factor in an abnormal situation of persecution, very much taking on a advocacy when needed, and also practical orientation, you know, enabling people to find the resources they need and working with partners to do that. So I think that's about 7 minutes, if I've calculated correctly.
Well, thank you very, very much, Paul. Gabriella, I'm passing the baton on to you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you to Paul, and thank you to Yasir for sharing so many personal things so articulately and really speaking to the heart of your own experience and what you need, and what so many people need who have experienced forced displacement in the way that you have, and the experiences that you've had as a result of it. And so I'm Gabriella. I'm head of programs and clinical lead for AMNA, Refugee Healing Network, which is a global organization that supports the psychosocial well-being of forced displaced communities. And We do a number of things, but what I'd like to focus today on is our community collective healing approach, and also our network approach, because I really want to talk about how we can work together as networks and community of practices to try to set up the types of programs like the Future Leaders program, and that can have the kind of impact that you so powerfully described. So a key piece of our work is about setting up safe spaces that are informed by both trauma-informed principles and also cultural sensitivity, identity-informed principles. And our approach is to take therapeutic practices, a bit like Paul have described, and to train people who are not therapeutic specialists, not trained clinicians, in safe practices that can really help people who have been impacted by forced displacement and may be carrying trauma or toxic stress in their bodies, to help them to regain a sense of safety and a sense of dignity in their bodies in a way that works at the pace of each individual person, does not assume trauma and does not go straight to unpacking trauma, and in a collective community environment. So a bit like Yasir spoke to, what we're really aiming to do in these community spaces is to support people to have a sense of community, a sense of solidarity, of making friendships when you're arriving in a new country or context that you may or may not stay in long term, and you may not know other people, and to try and foster a sense of belonging, and a sense of really not feeling alone, and knowing that there's places that you can go and people that you can turn to, where friendships can be fostered, and also, as well as whatever that space provides you, you know that they will help you to find the other things that you may need as well. And then within those spaces, what we're really trying to do is embed practices that support people who may be carrying trauma or toxic stress in their bodies, to have opportunities to both release and express, because trauma and stress builds up physically in the body, and the more that we can have ways to dispel and express that from bodies, which is somatic practices, the more those emotional and stress-based responses don't get lodged in our body. And we know, unfortunately, that adverse, difficult experiences that get stuck in our body, the responses, the stress responses can, if they're not expressed, lead to longer term both mental health and physical health impacts. So the more that we can have practices that help to release and express, the less likely we are to keep that carried within us. And then we also include practices like Yasir spoke to. So what are some ways, if we're dealing with trauma symptoms, if somebody may be experiencing going back into the past, having a flashback, having a trigger of some kind, disassociating, what are some ways in which we can help people to come back into the present moment and to have tools that they know will help them, like Yasir just described on a bus, to go, I'm not in that past memory, but I am in the here and now. And the more we can support people to have practices that they can take with them on their onwards journey, because many people, the journey of seeking asylum or arriving in a place that you're going to spend a long time in can take, I think on average, 10 years, the research is currently showing. So often people are living in transit countries or waiting for asylum for up to that amount of time, and in many cases much longer. So it's really important that we don't wait until somebody's arrived in their destination country and they've got their asylum status to offer people support. But we find ways to support people who are still on the move to have that kind of support, the psychoeducation that Paul spoke to, the opportunities for meaning making and expression and community. So the way that AMNA does this is we have a kind of training model that takes people through various different theoretical practices and then lots of collective healing practices, where we draw on the wisdoms of the world, an evidence-based practice that uses tools like rhythm and music and storytelling and different play activities to support this expression and meaning making that I've just described. And it's all in the context of a sense of play as well. So something that we know is a real casualty of dealing with protracted crisis and conflict and stress and uncertainty is that it can really affect our capacity to experience pleasure and joy. And a huge part of the work that we do is creating a sense of joy and play in the spaces and communities that we create, as well as opportunities for respite and rest, just being able to switch off, not having to pretend that you feel a certain way, not having to put on a brave face or to be in a certain mood. So what we do is we train a group of organizations all at the same time. So we've now been working in 5 different regions of the world, and in each region we work with about 10 community organizations at a time, and we take them on a journey, a training, capacity strengthening and funded journey together, and then they become a community of practice, a network that share learning together, and they're all working to support the same communities that have left the same country. So it may be people who've left Afghanistan, people who've left Ukraine, and we're planning to work in the MENA region next. And by creating a community of practice where we share learning and we upskill each other in that way, it's not just Amna delivering training, but we're also trying to build movements where those networks model alternative ways of working as collectives. So a lot of funding at the minute goes to big international non-governmental organizations, and lots of the models are a one-size-fits-all approach. And if we're working in a truly identity-informed way, then we really need to recognize that different communities have different needs, different individuals and communities have different needs, and often those communities are the ones who know best what they need. So rather than us saying this therapeutic approach is going to work for absolutely everybody, any place in the world, whatever community or gender, or whatever it is that somebody comes from, we really need to create participatory spaces where before we've even designed a program, we are understanding what is it that people need, what is it that people want, what's going to bring people to that space. And then as the community and the service evolves, there is constant space to refine and shape that service, to adapt it, to meet the needs, but also very importantly that there are facilitators and leaders in that service who are from the community themselves, speaking the language, shaping the service according to the needs. So I think I've also reached my 8-minute cap. So I'm going to stop there. There's lots more I can say, and we will, in fact, I'm just going to see if my colleague Ben, who's on the call, would like to add anything in. Ben, if you're there, unmute.
I am there, but I don't have anything to add, Gabs, but I'm here to kind of add to the conversation as it goes on, for sure.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks.
And we'll also put some links in the chat, because there's some services that we run, so some free monthly online training, which is short form training, and some free therapeutic groups for displaced communities, and wellbeing spaces for frontline practitioners, which I haven't spoken to, but are available to anyone in this community. And we'd love to hear from you if those spaces would benefit you or organizations or people that you're working with.
Thank you very much to both of you. And I think what stays with me is that sense of collaboration in developing the project further, which is so central. It's kind of a learning both ways, and recognizing what we know and what we don't know, even though we may never know what we don't know. I think, unfortunately, Jenny Regan, who's the chief executive of IMEX, which is an organization, a communication organization that focuses very much on the refugee sector and how displaced people's voices can be heard, is unable to be with us this afternoon because of family illness. So we're really sorry about that. And and hopefully at some point you'll have an opportunity to hear her, but it's worth just Googling the organization, IMIX, and putting communication. I suspect you'd be very interested to see. So we're going to be handing over now to Anne Bergreff, who's the clinical director and psychotherapist at Solace. And Farida was going to be joining us subsequently for the reflective space, but Farida, I wonder whether you could speak a little bit after, following on from Anne. So that's Farida Sandikai, who's the operation manager at New Citizens Gateway. Something's echoing, I'm not sure why. But Anne, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Jenny. Yes, my name is Anne Burgraff, and I'm also a family and systemic psychotherapist. And it's really lovely to actually be in a context with other family therapists, because I'm in many refugee contexts, but not often with many other family therapists. So, so I'm pleased to be here. And as Jenny mentioned, I'm the clinical director of Solace. And Solace is a specialist therapeutic organization exclusively for refugees and asylum seekers, and we are based in the north in Leeds, and we work throughout the whole of Yorkshire. And I've been the clinical lead since it began 17 years ago, and it's been very much a case of working together to learn from, you know, colleagues, clients in the development of the services. So I won't say too much about it, because my brief is really to talk about supporting kind of frontline staff and hosts and volunteers. But in my role as the clinical lead, I began supporting five volunteer therapists. So I've seen my role in many ways throughout as supporting and developing an infrastructure to enable therapists to work safely and effectively with refugees and asylum seekers. So it isn't just about myself. And so that's informed a lot of my thinking. And during the last few years, there's been a big sea change in the world, where previously refugees and asylum seekers were a kind of hidden population. It was a hidden world, and there wasn't such a concern about people's well-being. But since the 2015 kind of refugee crisis, refugees have rarely been out of the news, and since the pandemic, there's been a real concern about self-care and well-being. And so one of the things that's occurred is that many refugee organizations have contacted us during this time saying, we need to support our staff, we need something, you know, can you do reflective practice, or we've got a crisis here, can you bring supervision, or can you offer individual counseling? So we've done that for, you know, experts by experience and volunteers. But one of the things I become aware of is that often there is a lack of clarity about what's actually needed. They know that people are suffering, but it's not clear what the source of that is or how it needs to be addressed. And so, for example, in Leeds, the NHS during the pandemic, they said, "Oh, well, we're providing, you know, support for the staff, and we've got 24 EMDR therapists lined up." Now, in addition to being a family therapist, I'm an EMDR therapist, which is a specialist trauma-focused form of psychotherapy. And I thought, you know, you have staff working in a highly pressurized context where they're going to be experiencing multiple stressors. And of that group, there may be some who are going to experience some kind of trauma in that context, or even vicarious trauma. But it just occurred to me they didn't really seem to have thought that through, because there may be some that would benefit from EMDR, but really in this organizational context, you needed to think about, how is this organization supporting the people? What are the pressures on them? And how can they as an organization manage that? So, so when organizations ask us, we stepped in to help. But I think one of the things we've tried to do is help people understand that stress is something that has multiple factors to it, and it can express itself physically, psychologically, socially, and that how you address that can be both personal, how does an individual think about themselves, what do they need in their life, but also the organizational factors maybe putting a lot more pressure on people. And so some of the key things are expectations and roles, boundaries. And, you know, in the refugee sector, you tend to draw people who are very committed and who want to give of themselves, and can be unwittingly drawn into overstretching themselves or carrying the burdens of the stories with them. And so these are things that organizations need to really consider. Trauma, so being stressed is when you feel overwhelmed, and trauma is also an experience of feeling overwhelmed, but it's often in the context of feeling threatened, you know, life personally, or that you've witnessed or experienced it, or somebody close to you. And so working with people who are very traumatized, it is possible to experience what we call vicarious trauma. And the difference from stress is that you may become preoccupied with people's stories. You may be able find it difficult to separate your personal life and the rest of your professional life. And it may impact you again in multiple ways. So having the opportunity to spend some time, you know, with the organizations thinking through, you know, how do staff, how can you have good relationships? So what are the factors that make for a good organizational healthy relationship? Well, it's, you know, having those structures in place. So you've got good supervision, so people are clear about what's required, and that they are one part of a much bigger initiative to support people. So it's important to communicate that there are multiple levels and contexts that are putting pressure onto people. And in this way, we try to help with training or consultation to enable structures to be put in place, and also developing strategies. What we know is helps with stress, things like exercise, having various coping strategies, and using, you know, forms of relaxation, grounding techniques. Earlier on, we talked about the use of various grounding techniques. Both Paul did, and one of the things that we at Solace have done is we've developed a series of WhatsAppable videos. There's 6 WhatsApp psychoeducation ones that are being translated into Arabic and Farsi to help people understand the journeys and how stress and how trauma may be impacting you. And then alongside of that, we've got lots of different kind of stress management exercises. So progressive muscle relaxation, breathing, emotional freedom technique. And so those will be translated into Farsi and Arabic, and soon they'll be on our website. So that's one way in which we're trying to help frontline staff, but also these can be sent to your clients to help them develop some strategies. I'm aware I could speak for much longer, but I'll stop here. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Anne. We have got a space for people to ask questions, and so that will be brilliant, because I imagine people might want you to expand on some of what you've spoken about already. So I wonder, Farida Stanikal, can I hand over to you to share some of your thoughts with us?
Hi, my name is Farida. I work for a charity called New Citizens Gateway. We are based in Northwest London, supporting refugees and asylum seekers in London and outside London. And as you may all know, that asylum seekers and refugees' mental health and well-being continue to be a devastating global issue. Due to lack of early intervention on many practical and psychological levels, many asylum seekers and refugees experience re-traumatization following their departure from their home countries during their journey to reach safety in another country, as well as the unexpected difficulties and challenges faced after their arrival, which could last for several years. Timely intervention is key to ensuring that problems are addressed on an early stage and not left to reach crisis point, which places further burdens on health and social care services in terms of staffing and cost. I'm sure that you all agree that without assistance and support, mental health issue can have a very negative impact on someone's ability to resettle and integrate into a host or to a new society. At NCG, like other refugee organizations, our client group faced after their arrival in the UK, lots of challenges that could be poverty, homelessness, difficulty accessing services, language barrier, access to legal advice, lack of awareness of entitlements, don't know whom to trust, anxiety of outcome of their asylum claim, even though nowadays the case of Rwanda, and many more, which put our clients in a very difficult situation. At New Citizens Gateway, we have developed a research-based model, the integrated holistic model of support for refugees and asylum seekers. This model was developed 12 years ago based on Abraham Maslow's 5-stage model of hierarchy of basic human needs, which aims to acknowledge the whole person and all their physical, social, emotional, and spiritual needs. As expected at NCG, our counseling service has been very busy considering the increase in asylum seekers arriving from around the world. Generally, general practitioners, NHS professionals, and other voluntary sectors have reached out to us as the more suitable service refer their clients. And I explain why I think that the service that we developed at NCG work very well. At NCG, currently we have 18 bilingual qualified therapists who offer one-to-one counseling in 13 languages. And all these languages are refugee languages like Dari, Pashto, Farsi, Somali, Kurdish, Albanian, Punjabi, Turkish. These are the languages that we cover. And luckily, we not only have this sort of counseling for adults, we also do provide counseling for children, and we do have therapists that they speak different languages who provide support to our children. And we try to give them a kind of all these individuals a kind of intensive support to heal in a safe and private space. Because I was also an asylum seeker a few years ago, and I am proud to call myself a refugee all the time, although many years now, almost more than 20 years that I've got British citizenship, but still I'm proud to call myself a refugee. And I myself went through the same sort of experience that now even it's worse, that our clients group, they're suffering. Since the concept of mental health support might not be known to many refugees, it is a taboo among many communities. It's a kind of stigma, because many of them, they think if we talk about mental health, it means that we are not a normal person, we are crazy, we are mad, and sometimes we are shy to explain that because of this experience that people have got from back home. For example, I'm from Afghanistan, and I've got lots of connection with people from Middle East, from Africa, and they say that they are shy to express, but this is our role in the community and the organization, to tell them that it's completely different from your home country. Here it is completely acceptable, and we try to encourage them to come and use the services that we have. We have chosen, this is why at NCG, we have chosen indirect approach by running psychosocial activities such as cooking, gardening, art and craft workshop, yoga and mindfulness workshop, which has proved to be the best framework to support our client group and help them to improve their mental health and well-being. And I myself, as a refugee, I think that don't get me wrong, that the system that we have, I don't say that it's not working, but at the moment, the system which is designed for supporting, people with mental health is written by white people for white people, yes? And we believe that if we use different kind of indirect approach that we use at New Citizens Gateway in terms of indirect approach to run sessions, and that way you can, indirectly you help and support them. And from my experience, because I'm managing the whole project of psychosocial activities, I invite clients and they come and they talk, and then gradually they say, oh, Farida, how can I register myself to be seen by a counselor? And then you can see that gradually, when they know that it's not something weird, it is acceptable, and then we help them to improve, to build up their confidence and trust. And that way they come to us and they ask us that, okay, do you have Farsi speaker counselor? Do you have Arabic therapist? Can I come and use the service? And I think that I'm proudly say that this worked very well with our client group. And based on this service that we have, we did apply for Impact Award from GSK regarding supporting mental health and well-being of clients. And out of more than 400 charities nationally that they applied for that award, they choose 10 charities that they provide proper or nice or better model of support for refugees and asylum seekers. And we are among those 10 charities that we got the award, and hopefully the ceremony will be on 18th of May that we will get this award with nice big amount of money. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Farida. I think what you've just reminded us also is that we're all here personally as well. Many people have got a strong family history of migration in their family, others haven't, but we're listening both professionally and personally. So thank you very much for that. Kate and I are going to share some thoughts with you, and then we're going to open it up for a wider discussion, reflection before we go into smaller breakout rooms. But Kate, I wonder if you could kick us off.
Yes, do we just have a brief conversation? There were some themes that seem to just keep coming up all the time for me, and in these people's discussions about their work and their experience. I wanted to just to briefly talk about that hinge between, on the one hand, as Yasir pointed out, despair, but on the other hand, extraordinary hope, and that kind of looking back and looking forward. And I thought that came up a lot in conversations, that the resourcefulness and at the same time the fear and vulnerability. So we are always, as clinicians or in the work we're doing, actually managing that tension. And you and I think we're talking about that the other day in terms of how do we help people have a voice and speak about their suffering and as they wish, but also how do we help bring forth their strengths? And I was also aware of people, Paul mentioned it, Farida mentioned the idea of normalizing, acknowledging, and helping people to recognize the absolute appropriateness of their response, because I think pride and shame issues become a very culturally specific and need to be discussed as well. So that was the kind of one of the things that came up. But I was also very quickly aware of another theme, which was about the way the organizations that we've been hearing about have developed their work around safe structures, creating frameworks that were born of a learning of what was needed rather than imposed from, if you like, a kind of medical model, a white medical model of health. And I thought that, and I was very struck by the word safety that came up continually, a safe, trusting therapeutic relationship. I love the idea of the sort of strength of the communities that Amna built.
If I just come in with what you were saying about trust, and it is so central about, for people to trust us with their fears, their hopes, their despair, it's essential, but it's also important to recognize we're working with people very often where trust has just been broken. and how important it is to really recognize that, and often just taking things slowly, because it doesn't come easy to be sharing under that kind of a situation. There may be cultural issues that are hugely important, but there is something about the broken level of trust that can be so destructive to your sense of self.
And Anne was talking about in a sense, in terms of pace and how you pace yourself. I think Anne was referring a bit to that notion of people wanting to be helpful. And I think this was something we came up in our project with hosts, that desire to sort of just pour yourself into being helpful without actually having a measure of that difficulty of pace and timing, and what were the needs and what were the challenges of that relationship that you were entering into. So yeah, with hosts, it was a huge one. And I suppose it speaks to me again about how things are communicated between people and how communication is managed when you're talking cross-culturally. It was very, very evident in the difficulties some of our hosts had in terms of their understanding of how the families that they were hosting communicated with them, and how they communicated boundaries, for example, and were less than clear. And then we were interested in the idea of psychological safety, and how when there is no clarity in terms of the boundaries or how you're helping people understand the constraints, if you're not clear, then those people who have already suffered so much in terms of lack of safety and security are having to tiptoe around you and you as their host, trying to understand what you want of them. And that's terribly difficult. So I suppose that's another thing, and another thing about the word safety, pace and relationship. Yeah.
And maybe just one other thing to say in terms of what you were mentioning about pace before we open it up to others. I was just thinking about the physical experience of stress, of trauma, that Anne and others have referred to. You know, it's writ in the body, it stays here. And I think, Gabriella, you spoke about that as well. And that very often that's where we have to start, with not questioning it, not seeing it as a displacement of emotional distress, but actually that is a very real experience, and sort of the notion of whether there's been an identified organic cause or not. It's real, and going with that before anyone feels valued and recognized as a person. But maybe at this stage, if we open it up, and I know Tiffany, you had some things that you were wanting to share with us from the Trauma Treatment International. It'd just be good to have some of your reflections to kick off the wider discussion. And then we can go into breakout rooms at about 1:15, I think.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes.
Yeah, I have to say, with my disclaimer, I feel very privileged to be in such company, because I am not a psychologist. I'm more operationally overseeing the different work that we're doing at Trauma Treatment International. So forgive me if I kind of say something that's completely wrong. But one of the things I was talking to our head of clinical services about earlier was around this stabilization period. And it'd be interesting to hear people's thoughts on that, because, you know, hearing from Gabriella, and, you know, this whole discussion about, and actually also from Farida, of like, you know, different people are obviously in different places and have different times when they're ready, and it's got to be putting that control back into their hands when they're ready, maybe to explore the trauma that they suffered from, explore questions around mental health. And I know, you know, it used to be like, oh, there should be a certain period of stabilization before, and other things that need to be in place, support networks around people. But now, actually, I think it's interesting, like, actually, you know, it's not waiting until, as Anna's saying, until people are in the country they're going to end up in, but actually immediately after, or wherever they are en route, whatever time is right for them, but not to just wait until everything else is in place. So yeah, I just thought that was quite interesting in terms of people's experiences with that, and how they find that in terms of intervention.
Thank you. So what other thoughts, what's been going through everyone's mind would be just good to hear. Been incredibly rich afternoon so far.
I just wanted to respond to the issue of stabilization and the idea that you have to wait until someone is stable. And this is an issue that I hear a lot in the health service and the NHS, you know, that people are multiply traumatized, they don't fit the IAP service, but secondary mental health care can't accept them because they're not in a stable place. And I guess as a systemic therapist, you know, you adapt your therapy to the needs of the client, of the people that you're working with. And so one of the things that when I first began at Solace, I didn't really have a clue about body therapy, and but what I soon realized is that people that were coming to see me had lots of bodily experiences of pain and stress and chronic headaches and bowels and joints. And I say, have you been to the doctor? And they say yes. And you know, they given you anything? No, it doesn't help. And at that time, when I first recruited therapists, there was a therapist who, he was a qualified mental health counselor and nurse, but he was a body therapist. He did craniosacral therapy, and he caught my imagination when he talked about working with pain without medication. And I thought, how do you do that? Now I know, but I didn't at that time, but it intrigued me. And so I began with people coming to me about this, and these women who'd been experiencing sexual trauma. And I think, well, I'd say, we have this person who helps people with pain. Would you like to have a conversation? And I was incredibly surprised at how so many women were quite happy to see my colleague, who was a male, happy for him to put hands on them and help them with their pain. And that really started us a journey on how we understand the embodiment of pain and trauma and how we could work with that. And so we began using stabilizing and helping people to feel safe in their bodies as well as safe externally. And so there is much that you can do to help people overcome trauma, because the heart of trauma in many ways is a sense of helplessness. And so the more that you can help people understand, you know, the psychoeducation Paul talked about, understand themselves and what's happening and find ways of managing, you're helping people to recover. And there are times when people need to talk about things. There's a time when they don't need to talk about it and they prefer to keep it silent. And so it's just a comment that there isn't any right or wrong answer. It's about being guided by the people that you're working with and about what their needs are at that time. And so often therapy can go to the past, it can go to the present, it can go to the future, it can focus on what's going on internally or externally. Anyways, just a few comments about that.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about what came to mind for people? Or questions following on from?
I have a question, but I don't know if there's a protocol. Should we be raising hands? Sorry, I haven't got my camera because I'm in a train station, but I'll put it on now.
Go for it, yeah.
Thank you, Rachel, and I live in South London, and I'm part of a community sponsorship group where we resettled, over the past 5 years, we've helped resettle 2 families.
Sorry, I can't see a Rachel. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we've hit a point actually this far down the line, so 4.5 years, where the trauma is really beginning to, I've got my camera on, to manifest itself in ways that it hasn't before. And I'm sure that's, to the professionals, not uncommon. And the person I'm thinking about is seeing a very supportive GP, but of course, waiting lists are phenomenally long. And I'm just hearing about those incredible resources. And I do believe that the person I have in my mind is experiencing the bodily trauma, which I'm familiar with. I've worked in theatre. So I suppose it's a question for people who provide these incredible resources. What would you say to volunteers such as ourselves who are not qualified and can see real serious need? I don't know what to do anymore, you know? I'd love some help.
I don't know, Anna, do you want to respond? Sorry to put you on the spot again. Or anyone else who works, Anna or Gabriella, or anyone else who's working with more bodily techniques?
It's more about access to any kind of serious PTSD help, as well as any of the other softer approaches that people have mentioned. It's access, that's the problem.
I can speak a little bit about it. So I know I don't want to take up too much time on trauma treatment because I know I'm going to speak about it, but Trauma Treatment International, like the name, specialises in trauma treatment. But one thing we recognise, a bit like Paul was saying, is as you say, there's very long waiting lists in NHS, but one-to-one therapy can never be the only solution because there just aren't enough psychologists. There just isn't enough resource and capacity. So a lot of what we do is a bit around normalising it and the educating of basic coping strategies, basic awareness of spotting signs, kind of mitigating the impact of trauma, and that's for those who are hosting as well as those being hosted. So we're doing kind of trainings for groups who, you know, at different levels. So it might be organisationally working with people, you know, whether they're caseworkers or management, host working, and also those being hosted to try and spot the signs. And a bit like Anne was saying about some of the, and also Farida, some of the actual social support and the kind of, I guess, simple is the wrong word, but some of the things that anyone can do to help support that person and for them to understand some of the ways they can ground themselves, and I'm saying it wrong as I say because I'm not a psychologist, but put themselves back in the moment. So the spotting the signs and the coping mechanisms around that. But then also what we're doing is kind of mental health discussion peer support groups. So it's not just that you have the training, but then you have a chance to get together and share experiences and talk about what's going on with a clinical psychologist present, who can then help that discussion and answer things. And I know that's not the answer in terms of when you really need that high level potential PTSD support. There is a certain amount that we do of that. We have a trauma clinic. But yeah, it's trying to provide support that's more community and society based, so that it's at least some kind of help to those in that situation, if that helps in any.
And thank you very much. And just before we go into the groups, just Vicky Lord from the Therapeutic Refugee Action of Kingston, you wanted to say something about just, you've put something in the chat about working with EMDR. Do you want to just give us a couple of sentences before we go into our breakout rooms?
Well, it was just to notify anyone of a conference we've just set up for this year, where we've got some international speakers who've worked in the field, but also we set it up as trauma therapists, and it's got some real insightful interventions and just ways of working with different groups of people. One of the things that we experience, I work for two charities, is that we set up psychoeducation groups where we aren't talking about trauma as such, but the idea of the groups are for people to help each other deal and cope with the situation that they're in and their similar experiences, but they don't openly talk about their trauma. They don't disclose in the group. And with the MDR, we talk about processing the trauma and moving on from it, but it's very much in terms of dealing with some of the grounding it's processing in terms of grounding, feeling safer, working in your own space and being with others. So it's a psychosocial support group as well. And it's been used at NHS Bristol with 40 different groups so far in the last year with Afghan and Syrian refugees. And it also helps to signpost people. So with long waiting lists to the NHS and other charities, it's a way of supporting people therapeutically, psychosocially, and it can involve volunteers as facilitators. And then it can signpost people who need further support. It also helps to identify post-traumatic stress symptoms, so as a precursor to PTSD. So the feeling is that, if you can identify that, earlier.
I'll just stop you there because we're going to put people into great breakout groups. But I think I wanted to ask. It's really helpful. You've put the link there. But I also wanted to ask Rachel, I think you were asking for organisations that you could head yourself towards. Is that right? That was what I thought you were asking for as well, yeah? You haven't
yeah, and I can see some people have put some things in the chat.
So can you see them in the chat? That was all, and Vicky and what Vicky's put is there as well. So is that useful? Okay. We're going to go into breakout groups now. Are we in breakout groups? Am I right? Is it going to be for 15-20 minutes?
Let me just quickly check. Yes. Is it 15 minutes, Dan?
Yeah.
We can go for 20 minutes. That's absolutely fine. We want to make sure people have enough time to discuss this.
Okay. So we're going to go into breakout groups now, and then we're going to return and have a forum all together. Okay, that's the next step.
And we're asking if one person in each group can feedback afterwards. We'll do our best to make sure there's feedback from each group. And really what we're wanting you to think about is, share something about the challenges, 2 or 3 challenges, but also something about the ways what you found as being important in the way in which you've been working with people. So it's sort of doesn't only have to be solution focused, but would be good to hear what actually you found has been helpful as well.
Shall we collect some of the feedback from the groups now then, Jenny? Would that be a way forward?
Yeah. And the what we've been asked is for each group to speak, if you can, for about 2 minutes. I don't know how easy it's going to be, but yeah. And I don't know, Michael, were the groups, could you give us the name of somebody from each group, or should we just ask people to speak?
So group 1, Jenny, was a group with Paul from Refugee Council, and Norma Stewart was in that as well. So if someone from that group would like to volunteer themselves, unless they've already been volunteered by the group.
Yeah, I think it's going to be me, because I think Norma sadly had to leave. But thank you very much. Yes, I think what we were talking about, one of the really important challenges was about equity, and how do you provide a service for all, given the barriers. And one of the main issues that's come up with our client group is a language barrier. I mean, even our service, there are times when we get that people come with languages who we can't find an interpreter for, and so that's a really big question. So what we were thinking in response to that is very much what can we do, and there was lovely what was said about play, trauma, and the importance of play, and how can we bring that kind of that attitude towards the work that we do. And one thing that I wanted to share when I used to go into initial accommodation, and with other therapists who did that, one thing that we always kind of talked about in terms of the challenge was, it was a bit like we're going into a war zone, not because of the people, but because of the context that they brought with them. And so what we found of the most greatest importance is that we need to deal with that ourselves by having a playful attitude, you know, to look for the fun in terms of not only, of how we can make things, light and freeing for ourselves, but also with the people that we worked with who came with such heaviness. And, you know, coming back to this point about equity and how to level the playing field. I mean, personally, I'm sure a lot of people do this as a matter of course, but with our client group, it seems so important about the people's name, because often people come to this country and from a culture where their name is very different. So, you know, my name, Julia Lacroix, I mean, I think maybe 3 people in my lifetime have accurately pronounced it. And, work with so many people who have, names that aren't just names, but they have such great meaning. So just start by actually asking people, not only how to pronounce the name, which again is a wonderful level playing field, because people hear me, trying to get a name and messing it up quite often. So that's a really great way to reverse the expert position. And then, which part of your name, which part do you want to be called? So kind of starting from, from the very, from the ground up in terms of how we communicate with each other, how we respect each other. So I think that was something that we were, really interested in exploring. How can we do that? And the other thing that I think was really important is that talking with Norma, who comes with a huge experience as a family psychotherapist in Northern Ireland, is what can people like Norma offer our client group. And one thing I know Anne, with Solace, has done a fantastic, really recommend the resource that they've got in terms of both the context of the asylum seeking people and the therapy, the second part as well. So it really is about, what can, if we could help people understand the context that our clients are on, then that so informs what we can then do in a helpful way. And, just to say, we had Dick Blackwell here, well, I'm not sure he's back, but, this whole thing about bearing witness, where we're just, we're not doing for, even though people come to us with such needs that of course, we need to meet needs of food and shelter and all the practical things. What our clients always say to us after our work is, the greatest benefit that they've had from the work is that that we were with them. We were with them, not doing for them. We were simply with them and sharing their journey. So there's something that's just so important about being willing to be in if you like, the lifeboat in a stormy weather, looking after ourselves, absolutely critical, but also not necessarily needing to sort out everything, because there are so many things, endless things that we would on our own we will never be able to meet.
Thank you, Paul. I think, should we collect some more? But I'm just mindful of the time. That's just helpful. Thank you for that. Who is the? Can we do another group?
So Jenny, you in group 2.
And I'm sorry, somebody else was going to speak from the group. It was I hadn't written your name down. Apologies. From I think it was somebody from Action for Child Trauma Refugee. Is that Trauma International? Is that? Am I right? Who is going to be speaking from our group?
No.
Or Paula?
Thank
Paula, before I joined you, had you guys talked about who was going to speak, who was going to feed back? I know Haman was in the group and Salam.
I think Jenny was going to speak. Is that right?
Yeah, have we lost her? Do you want to say a few things? You were in our group, and I can pitch in if you want.
We had a nice idea. Somebody was mentioning, I think it was Salim, but I forgot her organization, about maybe doing support for children through one-to-one WhatsApp chats with a mental health professional or a mindfulness coach. So that could be anywhere in the world. And maybe from the practitioner side, that might not be private, that could be overseen. But, you know, from the child's perspective, they would have that WhatsApp conversation going on for times of crisis or need. I thought that was a really good idea. And then also just...
Can I just say, Dave, I don't know the name, but there is an organization doing this, the organization Brian's working with. If you could put it on the chat, because they're working, I think, only with adults, but would be good to explore.
Yeah, that's Kuth.
Okay, if you just put the...
Great. And then one other thing that I mentioned was a kind of directory. I know I've seen one before, but just like an elegant, like, user experience, punchy directory to signpost people, or maybe refer me again or refer us again to one that's already been made, because I see so many wonderful organizations here, and I'm always surprised at how many people are working towards the same.
Sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah, so yeah, an easily accessible directory to refer young people and adults to mental health services and other well-being services, like the people here. Thank you.
Thank you. And AFT and JRAN are working together to try to compile something like that, but we'll tell you more, you know, when we know more, we'll be able to share it. I think, Kate, the next group's the group you were part of.
I said I'd speak for the group. There were three of us. Chanda works as a volunteer in a detention centre, goes in and speaks to people. So was talking about the hiatus. People are in this very disempowered place. And Karen works a lot with children. And we were talking about that. Ultimately, we got into the difficulty of working with people who are in many ways so out of control of their own lives. And we got on to talking about groups. The things that helped Chanda in his work was working with groups of their own to support themselves. And that's come up in other people's conversations and the speakers today. But then the other thing that came up was the idea of the discourses around and how we have influence in terms of helping the narratives of change in this country. So we got into a larger sort of context, which is about how we help people understand and how we work collectively. And the idea about going from working in groups is working with groups ourselves and raising the voice and helping to empower people in their voices so that you have a much more collective action. That was it, rather than always an individualistic one-to-one. That was us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kate. The next group was room 4, and that was the room with Tiffany Watts from Trauma Treatment International, Vicky Lord, and a few others. I don't know who wants to speak from that group.
Start us off, and then anyone can add on. I think mainly we were actually talking more about where there's overlap and potential for collaboration. So there's 4 in our group. Weirdly, we're all from South London. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, I'm just looking at where we're working in similar areas, and just I think it goes in with the directory in the way of how we can refer to each other's organisations, where we can partner on things. So, for example, we're we're starting a project with women, Afghan women that have escaped Afghanistan, specifically because they were human rights activists, judges, journalists, whoever, and are here, but the trauma is based on their experience in Afghanistan and the work they were doing. And so then talking about, okay, so who's working in that area, who might actually be working with those kind of women, how can we work together? And also on one of our group members is working with Host Nation and befriending schemes and referring refugees who've maybe been in the UK a slightly longer amount of time and are kind of moving on maybe from initial mental health or trauma issues, but want to, it's more of the kind of the being in society and being in community. So who are looking for befrienders, and again, where we might refer to each other. So it's more kind of a how we work together and share our resource chat.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tiffany. The final group was the group that had Anne from Solace in it. Anne, I don't know if you want to just summarize the discussions that you had there.
Yes, Farida was there with me. I don't know if she's still here, but and then I think it was Kathy who was with us, but then left. Oh, okay, Farida, great. Well, we can both chip in. I guess we're so aware of so many of the issues, the barriers, etc. And one of the things that is particularly poignant is the decision-making process and the people's ability to speak and give a coherent narrative when they're extremely stressed or traumatized. And so the decision-making is deeply flawed, which is why we've got 160,000 asylum seekers who still have unresolved cases. And I'd like to see a new model of decision-making, which would include a an expert on the legal side of it, a psychological expert who could talk about the trauma, and a country expert. So that's one thing, but that's going to be a long way away, because with the direction of travel at the moment with the government, the plan is just to stop people seeking asylum in the first place. So there's some of these bigger problems. More immediately, it's for people who are here is the issue of accessing, sort of specialist mental health support, but also there's opportunities to form connections in safe contexts. And so the thing I just wanted to say about the access to mental health services is Paul kindly mentioned the e-learning courses that we've developed at Solace, and that for me is one part of trying to establish. What I'd like to do is establish a network of refugee and asylum seeker mental health champions in all aspects of the service. And there's more about that in that course, but it would essentially involve taking someone who has an interest and a passion in asylum seekers and refugees and developing their role to be a champion, and they would be expected to understand more about the process, the context in which it's going on, what the local resources are, and what's best practice, and that we could then develop a network of support, a community of practice. Now that's very, very brief, but that's a possible solution. How we can enable somehow communities to form more connections and work together or community connectors is, I think, an ongoing challenge. But I love the groups that Farida talked about, and there's many examples of that, as a way of going forward. Babette Rothschild, a trauma guru, says, the goal of therapy with trauma survivors is to enhance their lives, and I think that's the one thing we're all trying to do.
Thank you, Anna.
Right. Well, Jenny and Kate, any final words before I wrap up? Or
This has just been a really very interesting and quite a powerful experience for me. I think it's very easy to feel, often feel isolated and struggling, as Karen in my group said, pushing water up a hill. And when you hear what other people are doing and what's happening, it becomes very affirming, and I'm grateful to you all for that. Our strapline is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness, and I think there's quite a few being lit here, and I'm very appreciative of it. Thank you.
And I think for myself, definitely connect with what Kate's saying, and so much of what everyone said, and I found myself in practical mode of hoping we can collate all the information that's been shared, all the the links, and because I think there's that moving between actually taking on board emotionally, but also the very practical how to link, which is so central. So just thank you everyone for all you've shared this afternoon.
Well, thanks so much, Jenny and Kate, for hosting this so sensitively and drawing out some of these reflections that under normal circumstances we may not have felt or heard. But Yasir set the tone today, and what particularly moved me was his talking about the sense of my existence and finding that in so as the core of what he needed in order to strengthen himself. And in terms of the work that we've done with refugees and in Kosovo over the years, that's and what I think we can best help refugees and asylum seekers in this country find is that humanity, or the humanity in us, but the human spirit in each one of us, and in them in particular, because if we can help people tap into that resilience and that human spirit, it may sound esoteric, but that's what we're all doing. That's what we're all trying to do. And Paul talked about learning from the people that we work with. And there's so much around that in terms of the importance of play, the creation of safe spaces, and all the speakers alluded to that. And if you go back to the cultures that we all have, but the cultures that many of the refugees come from, when we worked in Albania or in Kosovo, the Albanian culture, the canon, had 4 pillars, has 4 pillars, and those 4 pillars speak very closely to what Paul was talking about in the beginning: truth and hospitality, being non-judgmental. Hospitality is key, and the best thing that we could ever do in refugee camps was to go and have a cup of coffee made by a refugee in a tent, and not offer anything other than being thankful to share a coffee and to normalize their lives in terms of what the real people that they are, the sense of their existence, and to be able to help recognize that. And so that's, I guess, what we're all trying to do in our different ways. And I'd just like to ask, before we wrap up, we're going to summarize all these findings from the group and bring it together. And Dan is now going to talk about how we're going to bring it together in JRAN, and how in the JRAN mental health app and hub that we're bringing together, all of these suggestions that were made, or many of these suggestions that were made, can come to life, and you can all contribute to these. So let's Dan, why don't you talk a little bit about that, because you could bring in some of the issues and some of the potential solutions that were raised, and talk about how we can take those and bring the learnings of this forum into what we want to bring together in terms of overlap and collaboration that you were talking about, and even into the whole decision-making process with government, because we are going to be taking these findings to government. Dan?
Yeah, absolutely, David. That's really powerful, and it's been really inspiring hearing the feedback from all of the groups. I jumped in and out of some of those groups, and it was great just seeing the conversations that were going on there. I think a couple of things that stood out to me, and I'll just speak for a couple of minutes. A couple of things that stood out to me. Look, we're looking at, I think it was Paul from the first group talked about equity and cultural engagement, as well as just the opportunity to form connections with people. And David and I were discussing during the breakout room sessions, how do we bring in, particularly off the back of Yasir's really inspiring and quite moving speech at the beginning of this forum, how do we bring in the voice of those with lived experience into these conversations? And we can do that through these kinds of forums. But at JRAN, one of the things that we would like to do, we were discussing, and I think this is something that we could all probably bring into our own organizations and the way we do things, is whether or not we have advisory boards. If they're not on the staff team, we have advisory boards made up of those with lived experience, so that we can ask those individuals, what are your thoughts on these things, because they are going to be the experts in these areas. And so we can really be led in that sense by those people with lived experience. The findings of all of the discussion groups are going to be collated, and so we will make that publicly available. We want these forums to be solution focused and action focused. So we want to be able to take these things forward. And that was the reason that we held the forum with this specific topic, because of the feedback from the network and the feedback from previous online forums. And so we are listening, and we're going to take this into account as we move forward for future forums. And finally, I think something that has come up in all of our previous forums, as well as today, is the need for that shared space where we can share the work that is going on, a hub or a directory where people can go to and look at what support services are available. So at JRAN, we've been developing that. You can go to our website, jran.uk, and we are relying within this. We're relying on you guys. We're relying on organisations within the sector to share your work and what's going on. We want that to be a space that people can visit and find out the support that is available, whether that is refugees and asylum seekers or community support groups or host families. So if you want your organisation's information to be there, then please do get in touch with us. There's a really easy way that you can just drop us an email. We can make sure that happens. But David, I'll hand back to you now.
And can I just chip in that that's also the Refugee Hub has been very much something that we're working together with the Association of Family Therapy. So that's been a really important part of it, because it comes out of our shared thinking. Yeah.
Jenny, do you want you and Kate to have a final word?
Hi, okay. I think it's been summed up pretty thoroughly, really. I don't know what it feels. It just seems to me there are so many different levels of intervention, aren't there? There's the sort of the relationship. There's the activity in the relationship. There are the groups. Then there's the professional or the people who are the support sector and the people who are helping. And then there's higher levels. It feels like there are these multiple levels. So our engagement and our intervention and our hope to kind of change, the trajectory for change can come in at so many different levels. And I think our speakers kind of have addressed that in different ways. It's been very important to hear.
Actually, linked with that, I was just thinking that the kinds of themes, and this is, I'm aware this is what many people would have been thinking about, but there are so many kinds of issues, you know, almost thinking about thought bubbles. There's something about the experience of being a refugee, a displaced person, asylum seeker, the experience of migration, which in itself can be, you know, it carries its own story, the whole experience of displacement, of leaving one person, of leaving your family, moving elsewhere, of being left by your family. You know, there's something about migration in our small group. Somebody, you talked a bit about somebody with learning difficulties. There are other kinds of life challenges, learning difficulties, illness. Those are issues that people carry through with them. So there's something about holding in mind all sorts of different levels and just choosing something that we're focusing on and holding on to the fact that this is one part of people's identity, but it's not the only or the main determinant of who people are, and indeed for many people in this grouping of who you are. So just thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions. So great.